sorry, I did mention that the microphone sounds funny. Anyway, it is what it is. So I'd like to welcome you. I am Sarah Buck, the current president of the Rotary Club of Chicago. And I'd like to welcome you to the 5,719th meeting of the Rotary Club of Chicago. So we have a few announcements here as we start, and we always start with our member fun fact. So this is Robert Harney. He is a collector of fine spirits and likes to attend mixology classes. So this is Robert. Robert is the secretary on our board. Now, it's been 2 weeks since we've had our last member fun fact. Which members, it's a short, you gotta raise your hand. Which member's company insures the Chicago Fire Players home and auto policies? Oh, Ryan, I saw your hand first. Shada, that's correct. All right, Ryan. Ryan earns his first sticker. So I'll bring you the sticker here, Ryan. Here you go, Ryan. More promotion. Okay, yes. So the correct answer is Shada, who is our president nominee. So this is a big announcement. If you have not been paying attention to the curator, the emails, or were not at the meeting last week, we are moving to a new location for only a couple of meetings. So the Tuesday evening meetings and the Tuesday fellowship meeting. So one evening meeting, we only have one evening meeting anyway, and one lunch meeting will be at Avley on the Park. The location is on Randolph, well, it's off of Randolph, but it's near the Blue Cross Blue Shield building, the Aon Center. It's over in that area. And so we had our Tuesday evening meeting there a few weeks ago, and so starting in November. So the Tuesday evening meeting, I think it's the 3rd election day. You'll already have voted, so you can come out and join us for that Tuesday evening meeting. And then also, starting in November, all of your lunches will cost $40. So we were able to drop the price. So starting in November, you'll see that your cost for attending meetings will be $40, coming down from where it was. This will be for members and visitors. It does not include special occasions like the installation or the Woman of the Year, but regular meetings will be $40 starting in November. Marshall. What is the off the top of my head, couldn't possibly tell you. But it is in the emails and the gyrator, and so we'll be really pushing this. So today's the 22nd, so we have another meeting next week. We'll add the address. We'll put a little more, maybe towards yeah, and so additionally, I should mention that parking at Avley costs $4. That's what I've been told. So that's a big help as well. So make sure that you do keep that on your radar. Okay, let's move forward then. We are restarting the dictionary project, so you can grab a partner to deliver dictionaries. This is a project that we do for 3rd graders around the city, and we deliver dictionaries to them and make a presentation. They're more than just dictionaries. There's almost like an encyclopedia in the back. If you are interested in doing this, you can contact Wes. He's got his email address there. If you'd like to take a picture, it's also in the gyrator as well. For those who are visiting us today, there should be QR codes around that take you to the gyrator. If it's not on the table, it should be. We can talk to the front desk if you are interested in seeing our gyrator. Okay, so we have a couple community service committee projects coming up as well. So we are currently collecting items for Exodus World Services for a refugee family. Well, actually, it's a refugee individual. So we're partnering with Exodus World Services to solicit items for a refugee welcome pack. In the email, in the gyrator, you will see a link that takes you to a page that has the list of items. It's very similar to a wedding or baby shower registry where you'll see the items, you'll put your name next to it, and we're going to get those to Lisa, who is helping us coordinate the items. So if you are interested, you'll click the link, you'll see the moderator or the email, and put your name next to one of those items. We also have a volunteer opportunity with the First Lego League. This is one of our CPS grant winners. Members or mentors are needed for the Pole Classical First Lego League. You can be an assistant coach or a mentor to children who are interested in STEM. Their final competition is in December. So if you're interested in being a mentor, go ahead and reach out to Patricia. PCs for People is a group that collects used electronics, so computers that you don't use anymore, everything, cords, printers, it's all sorts of things. So you can see the list there, phones, desktops, flat screen TVs. So these are donated to PCs for People, who then refurbish them and provide them to low-income individuals and families. So this is an excellent program. You can Google them to find out more information, and we're helping to collect as well. We have a couple Save the Dates coming up. We are doing a Thanksgiving Day volunteer event. The Community Service Committee is helping to organize this. The times are in the email that went out today. So they are Thanksgiving Day shifts, but also Alita needs help with prepping as well. So if you're unavailable on Thanksgiving Day, there are some times before that you can volunteer for food prep. Putting a bug in your ear, as always, about our February 23rd birthday party fundraiser. It'll be held at Chicago Theater Works on Belmont, and the projects of the International Service Committee will be spotlighted. So, our speaker today is on polarization, democracy, and the flip side. So I'm about to turn the microphone over to our speaker for today. All of our questions will be done at the end. And so when Eric finishes drinking that water, I will invite him up to do the introduction.
In today's polarized political environment, particularly now before the election, I find that the inability to discuss, debate, or empathize with another's point of view is sorely lacking. And it is one of the fundamental roadblocks, I think, to improving the situation behind the polarization. Now, some years ago, and I'm sure Jihan would know better because I think this was in the early days of this organization. But some years ago, I stumbled upon an organization called The Flip Side, which seemed to feel the same way as I do and decided to actually do something about it. So they issue a daily curated email on the hot topic of that day with an equal number of news excerpts from generally left, right, and sometimes libertarian news sources, and they're focusing on legitimate, not fake news sources within each of those categories across those spectrum. And I think it's a really amazing. I'm amazed every morning when I read this, and I do read it religiously, on how frequently I see whatever that day's topic is. I see it come through, and it's something that I've made my mind up on already, right? Or at the very least, it's hard for me to see that that's something that even has another perspective to it, only to find out that there is one. And maybe I agree with it, maybe I don't, but I always learn something, and sometimes I change my mind. Now, they also organize forums on some pretty heavy topics that allow users to ask a liberal or ask a conservative, right? To allow people to ask legitimate questions and get legitimate answers in a safe space. So I personally really believe in their mission, and I think that they do a great job of executing that mission. It's honestly the only daily news-related email that I actually religiously read every day. And frankly, I think it just helps me sometimes psychologically get through the daily polarization. So now, because of his own passion for increasing cross-partisan understanding in order to foster compromise and decrease that polarization, Jihan Varisco co-founded The Flip Side and is now CEO. He previously worked as an investigator for the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board. Pull that from your LinkedIn. He has degrees in political science and public policy from the University of Chicago. Please welcome Jihan.
Well, thank you, Eric, and thank you for having me. Do I have slides? Yes, perfect. So I'm going to talk a little about myself, a little about polarization. I will warn you, it might be a little data heavy. I'm from the University of Chicago, so don't worry too much about that. Just focus on the main stuff. So anyway, I work in the media, so we're going to talk a little about the media and how that impacts polarization, how that obviously impacts democracy. So these are two maps. These are county level presidential election maps. And this is from 2004 and 2020. And I think these maps are very helpful because keep in mind 2004, the top map. So red is Republican. That was a Republican victory. That was George W. Bush's second term. 2020 obviously was a Democratic victory. But if you look at it, there's a lot more red in the 2020. And that shows just how polarized on a county level we've become, where you don't have all of that blue in the middle of the country that you had just a few years ago. And here's Illinois in the last presidential election. Now we live in Illinois. You'll notice we're up at the very top right, that deep blue area, which is most of the people in the state, but the rest of the state is red. And that's our own state. And so I think that's also a good example of just the fact that if you drive southwest a few hours, you're going to get into very red country. That's still in Illinois, still in the same state. This is a great chart. So when did polarization start? How long has it been going on? And so if you look at the left all the way, this is 1994. And what you can see from this chart, this is showing issues among Republicans and Democrats. So basically, where do they fall on the issue spectrum? And it's looking at 10 different issues. And what you see is there's a lot of overlap. So that means that if you have a conservative Democrat and a liberal Republican, do they generally agree? Do they overlap in their beliefs? And you can see in 1994, there's quite a bit of overlap. The median Democrat and the median Republican, which is the two lines there, they're not too far apart. And when you're not too far apart, it's pretty easy to compromise. It's pretty easy to understand where the other side is coming from, because again, you don't really disagree on too much. And that continued for a while. So you go up to 2004 and you see it changed a little, but if anything, the median Republican Democrat got a little closer together. And I think that's interesting. I mean, 2004 was a little divided, if you remember, but not too much. But then you go to 2017 and there's a big difference. You can see the median just exploded apart from each other. And the purple area, which is the overlap in issues, is much smaller. And that basically means that it's really hard to compromise because your median Republican, just your average Republican voting person, and your median Democrat, they don't agree on very much anymore. And your median, I don't have the chart here, but your median elected politician from each party is also much farther apart. And when you have people who just fundamentally disagree on a lot of issues, well, it's a lot harder to talk to people. It's a lot harder to work with people. It's a lot harder to understand people in the first place. So it's not just that people are apart on the issues. Partisans also don't like the other side. So these are two charts. So one chart on the left is they ask people, do you think members of the other party are lazy or immoral or dishonest, closed-minded, unintelligent? And the left side of this chart is the people who said yes from each party. And as you can see, it's pretty high. So 72% of Republicans, 63% of Democrats say the other party is immoral. So this is not just, I disagree with you. This is, you are a bad person because you are part of this party. And that makes it pretty hard to compromise. If it's not just about an issue, it's about you're actually a bad person. So you don't compromise with bad people very often because they're bad. On the right, we have another chart, and this is a chart. Do you think that the other party or your party respects democracy, governs honestly, respects different types of people? And this gets at the democracy part of this. Do you trust that the other side will also respect democracy if they win? And the sad answer is that for both sides, the answer is no. So if you look at the very top, only 21% of Republicans say that the Democrats respect democracy and that they will govern honestly. And 24% of Democrats say that about Republicans. Now that's even worse than the other side is evil. The other side is evil and hates democracy. So now every election turns into this existential, either we win or the evil people take over, they have terrible beliefs and they destroy democracy. And I think you can probably understand why that's generally unhealthy for a democracy when you have that level of polarization. One of the drivers of that is that we're just not interacting very much anymore. So you saw that county level map at the beginning. You don't really live next to a lot of people who disagree with you. And this gets at that. It says, do you have friends who are from the other party or from your party? And basically people say, yes, I have lots of friends from my party. Not too many people have friends from the other party. And so there's a lot less social mingling that could help people understand each other. Also, one of the side effects of this on the chart on the right, a lot of people don't like both parties, which I'm sure will not be a surprise to anybody here. But 28% of people say they have unfavorable views of both Democrats and Republicans. And again, no one likes the parties. Parties don't like each other. No one likes anybody. So why does this come about? So people don't trust each other, but more than that, there are no shared institutions that people trust anymore. And this gets at that. So trust in mass media. So in 1973, most people trusted the media, believe it or not. 70% of people said, I generally trust that the media gets it right, that they're honest, all that stuff. As you can see from the chart on the left, that changed over time, slowly, and is now at 32%, which is not a large amount. And worse than that, 39% now say that they have no trust at all in the media. And if you look at the right side, that's the partisan breakdown. So what you see is for up until 2000 or so, you saw a change in both parties. A bit more for Republicans, but there was about the same level. But once you get past that, you see Republicans' trust went way down. Democrat trust stayed about the same, went up a little in 2016, then is now coming back down. But Republican trust in 2016 just dropped off the floor. So 11% of Republicans right now say that they trust the mass media. Now, if you think that it's important for the media to share things or to provide information, do investigations, the fact that just about all of one of our major parties straight up doesn't trust the media is problematic. We have no shared authorities that we can say, okay, this is what is true. And that's not very healthy. So one of the reasons conservatives will say, oh, the media is biased. And you know what? I agree with them. And at the flip side, we don't claim to be unbiased. We claim to be equally biased. So we say there's bias on both sides, and we're gonna share that bias, and you'll see both sides. And I think one of the reasons that trust in media has gone down is that media has become more biased. And I don't mean one side or another side. In general, a lot of people are reading the same media of people they agree with. And you don't have a media source where everybody watches it, like the 10 o'clock news anymore, because everyone has cable and they have streaming, and you either watch Fox News or you watch NBC. There's no shared media resource, and because there's no shared media resource, the media doesn't need to cater to that. If you're reading the New York Times, you're probably a liberal, and the New York Times knows that, and so they say, okay, our content should be geared towards people who fit this. And then anyone who's not a liberal unsubscribes, and it just self-reinforces. And I'm not blaming anyone. I mean, I can't blame the media. They need money, they need to survive, but it's not good for the country. So here's just a few examples of how bias can show in media. So this is two political stories by the same reporter on two issues that are pretty similar. So when Obama took over in his first term, he replaced most of the US attorneys. When Trump took over, he did about the same thing. I mean, Biden did the same thing. This is new president comes in, he replaces attorneys, but the tone of these two headlines, Obama is replacing the attorneys, but Trump is ousting them. And they're Obama appointed attorneys now. So the first is not say Bush appointed attorneys. So that's one way that bias can manifest. Another is, what are you covering? So here we have two stories that are sort of at the extreme. So one story is, here's a refugee who ended up at prison, and that's a great story. But obviously most refugees will not end up at prison. And then on the other hand, you have a Breitbart piece, oh, a refugee is assaulting some woman. And again, most refugees will not assault anyone. You see it today with immigration, and people are saying, oh, these immigrants are coming in, they're committing crimes, they're eating dogs in Springfield or whatever, which is obviously crazy. And this sort of anecdote that is obviously not representative of most immigrants. But what do people focus on? What are people thinking about when they read the news? One other thing is focusing on a different side of the story. So these two headlines, they're about the same issue. It was a thing in the Trump administration. They said doctors can choose not to provide certain care based on their moral values. And is that protecting the conscience of doctors, or is it allowing doctors to discriminate? And how you see that has become partisan. Another thing that comes up a lot is the political affiliation of journalists. So why don't Republicans trust the media? Well, one reason might be that there aren't a lot of Republicans left in the media. So on this chart, around in 1971, 25% of journalists were Republican, identified as Republican, which is, it's not a majority, but it's a good number. It's a quarter of your newsroom. So anytime you've got a news story, there's going to be some Republicans around. Maybe you'll bounce ideas off a Republican. Maybe you'll do a proofread, that sort of thing. There's some input there from people on both sides. But as you see over time, that started to fall. And we get to 2022, now it's 3.4%. And if you know anything about echo chambers, even if you have the best possible meaning, if you are in a place where everyone agrees with you, you're not going to question things that everyone agrees on. And there's no Republicans to step in and say, hey, maybe you should question this, maybe this isn't true. And you end up with situations where you have news stories that get widely reported, turn out to not be true, or turn out to be true even though they were criticized at the time. We'll get into some of that as we go forward. But before we get there, there's another issue that's come up with the media is, should both sides get equal coverage? And something like, is one side just saying information, misinformation, or should we listen to their viewpoint? Now, I'm biased here. I support the flip side. I think we should listen to all viewpoints, but that is now the majority among journalists that Pew has asked. And that's not what the US public wants, but worse than that, you see a poll like this where not every side deserves equal coverage, but you go back, most of the journalists saying that are Democrats, or are at least not Republicans. So Republican voters see that and they say, okay, the people in the media, they don't want to cover both sides. They don't like us because, as you know, Democrats don't like Republicans from the other slide earlier. So why should we trust them? And that's a challenge. Another thing that comes up is, oh, okay, that's, you're not supposed to see all of that at once, but it's okay. So something that comes up is fact checking. And so one example I have, so people say things that are not true. Politicians say things that are not true all the time. And it's valuable to point that out, but at the same time, it's important not to be biased when you do that. And so the example that we'll come up to on the next slide is you have two identical statements a couple years apart about we didn't have an income tax until 1913 when the Constitution was amended. And this was fact checked by PolitiFact, and the two things got different ratings. One was half true, one was mostly true. And this was highlighted because the half true was a Republican, Ron Paul, and the mostly true was a Democrat, Jim Webb, former senator. Now, to their credit, when this was pointed out to PolitiFact, they changed their rating. So you can see here the two statements. The bottom one was initially mostly true. They changed it to half true. But more important to me than the rating is that when they changed the rating from mostly true to half true, they didn't change the text at all. So they said all of the explanation is the same. We're not changing any of that. Well, that says to me, what's the difference to PolitiFact between half true and mostly true? And it sounds like maybe they don't know the difference themselves if it's the same write-up. And so that's a problem. Another thing that comes up, Republicans will say, oh, what are you fact checking? And so in 2012, Mitt Romney was dinged 19 times. In 10 years, all Democrats were dinged 25 times. Now, I think it's unlikely that there weren't more falsehoods from Democrats in that times, not because Democrats like to say falsehoods, but because they're politicians, and that happens. Another example, this is a fact check from NPR, and this was from Trump's State of the Union a few years back. And Trump put a statement about how there's a record number of women in Congress. And that was a true statement. There were, in fact, a record number. And the fact check basically says this is true, but Trump didn't do that. It's mostly Democrats. And that's also true, but it's not really a fact check. It's basically saying we don't really like that this is true because it makes Trump look good and he didn't bring it about, so he doesn't deserve credit. And that's fine if you're writing an op-ed. It's not fine if you're trying to check facts, because then Republicans see this and they say, when you're fact checking our dogs being eaten in Springfield, why should I trust you? And that's a problem. Here's another example. So again, yeah, this wasn't supposed to show up right away, but it's okay. So I think you were all around for COVID times, and there was a lot of controversy. Where did COVID come from? And some people said maybe this came from a Chinese lab that was near this market that it may have come from. And that was labeled pants on fire. It was removed from social media. This was seen as a conspiracy theory. And this is from PolitiFact, said this claim is inaccurate and ridiculous. That was what PolitiFact said about this claim. Now, fast forward 1 year later, they had to retract the fact check because it turns out that a lot of people in the US government think maybe it did in fact come from this lab. And that's kind of embarrassing. So I bring that up not to say fact checks are bad or that the media is terrible, but that you have to be careful because trust is hard to find. And when you get caught cutting corners, you lose that trust. And that's something you don't want to happen. So where do we go from here? It's all doom and gloom so far, but there is hope. So you should engage productively. And so what does that mean to engage productively? So focus on the process. So when you're talking about an issue, don't focus on the issue, focus on how you're interacting on the issue. So something like abortion, like people have very strong feelings about abortion. Should it be legal? Should it not be legal? So don't talk about that. I mean, you talk about that sometimes, but talk about how are we going to decide? So maybe a state should decide, maybe a court should decide, maybe the federal government should decide. Talk about that. Talk about why maybe one group or another group should decide. Establish some common ground there and then go from that. Something like the filibuster comes up a lot in the Senate, which makes it very hard to pass legislation. And some people say, oh, we need to get rid of this so we can pass our legislation. It happened with the Biden administration. It happened with the Trump administration. People say, oh, let's get rid of these obstructionists. But think about it. What about when you're not in power? Do you still want to get rid of this? And maybe you do. But talk about that more than talk about, here's my one issue. Let's get this one issue passed. Final issue is federalism. So we are 50 states, and they are very, very diverse states. Very different, and that's okay because we have a lot of very different people in this country, right? We have millions and millions of people who are conservative, who are Republican, and we have millions who are Democrat and who are liberal, and they can live together in large part because different states can have different policies. That brings up the flip side, which is where I'm coming from. So Eric gave us a great intro, but basically what we do is every day we do a 5-minute digest. Here's what the left is saying, here's what the right is saying on one issue. And the idea is that most people are not going to get that in their daily life. You don't read every media source, you're busy, you have lives, maybe you go on your social media, but it's probably people who agree with you. And not only that, let's say you do want to know the other side. Let's say you say, okay, I'm a Democrat, but I want to know what the other side is saying. And you turn on Fox News and you get Tucker Carlson or you get Laura Ingraham, and you're not going to be very happy, and you're going to turn it off, and you're going to think that most Republicans are evil, like we saw in the charter. And so part of what we do is we make it accessible. We say, if you disagree with this side, what will help you understand? And so that's important for us. So when we have the left side, the right side, each side is not aimed at people who agree. You don't need us for that. It's aimed at people who don't agree. So we want conservatives to focus on the left side and say, here's this view I'm not getting. And so we say, is this accessible? Will this help you understand? Is it too inflammatory that you're going to get angry and punch your computer? We don't want that to happen. So that's where the flip side comes in. There's other groups, though. We're not the only people out there. So one group is Braver Angels. Some of you may be familiar with them. I think Braver Angels is great. They do a lot of meet and greet between Reds and Blues. They handle debates, civil debates. They're doing a lot of election stuff. So if you're interested in interacting with people who disagree with you in person, look up Braver Angels. They have a Chicago chapter. They're really nice. Also, talk to your friends and neighbors. Maybe some of them disagree with you, maybe not, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of angry people online, and most people are not angry when you talk to them in person. So I think it helps to talk in person sometimes. And we're going to end with my favorite cartoon. Some of you may like arguing on the internet. Believe it or not, there are better things to do in life. Go to bed. And thank you.
I have a couple questions. Thank you for the great presentation. What are your thoughts around when we do a fact check and how are the media gets accountable for all the information that fact check is actually not accurate? Is there a holding accountable portion of it? That's my first question. Second question is, I have a teenager and he gets very passionate about politics too. I don't want him to, when we turn on the TV, unfortunately, we see bullying and all the other things. What are your thoughts around, is your organization okay for him to read? What is the level of reading there for the teenagers? Thoughts?
Okay, thank you. So I'll start with your first question. Your first question is, how is media held accountable when they get fact checks wrong? And that's a great question. And the answer is that depends on the media, basically. It also depends on viewers. So one way that the media is held accountable, people stop reading it. So when you see the media, they fail a fact check, people are going to say, okay, well, you're biased, I'm not going to read you anymore. And that earlier chart, we had trust in media. One of the reasons there is so little trust in media is things like getting fact checks wrong. So a lot of conservatives don't trust NPR. They say NPR is biased, and one reason is this fact check I showed you earlier, where basically they said this is true, but we don't like it. And I'll go on a little tangent. I think if fact checkers would focus more on just facts, that would be valuable, because a lot of times they'll add context, and there are times when context is useful, but context has a lot of room for your own opinion. And if you just have, is this true or false, that's a lot easier to do. People will trust you. Your second question, is the flip side suitable for young people like your son? Absolutely. So we have high schools who actually subscribe to us. So we cover issues that are in the media. So sometimes if the news is serious, the coverage will be serious. So that would be the one thing, but it's nothing you won't see on, say, the New York Times homepage or the 10 o'clock news. So like we covered the P. Diddy sexual assault allegations, and that's a serious topic, but it's also all over the news. So that's the sort of thing that might cause some issues, but other than that, We do our best not to include profanity, even if it's in some of our sources, that sort of thing, to be respectful. We generally avoid any inflammatory language because that's not what we're going for. Should I? Go ahead.
No, thank you for the presentation. I was going to ask, like, how have you done any research about like how like how much they actually into like a lot of these headlines? Because I think a lot of times we see how you know like, we see people like driven reading headlines and like they just start rather than not even in depth or they dig deeper out. Like for example, like with one out like maybe 4 years ago when Donald Trump said about the using like horse and was that infected? Whatever that
Ivermectin, yes.
Huge uptick in medical cases. People being infected. Except for like ER because of that reason, but I think it's most likely these were people who don't read the headlines, they don't read no fact checks themselves. I would just go back to my question, how do you have done research for finding how many confident people really go in depth in reading the headlines?
So that's a good question. So the question is, do people read past the headlines? Or do they just read the headline and go off and take horse medicine? Not recommended. And so I don't know the specific answer. I'm sure if you see me after, I bet I can find you some people who do study that. We don't do as much research ourselves, but I think most of you are probably aware of the term burying the lead, which basically means you take the important part, you put it way down in paragraph 10, and the idea is that most people don't get that far. So I think a lot of people do stop at the headlines, and that's unfortunate, but it's what it is. I can't give you exact data on that, though.
So, yeah, thank you. Horrifying and great. But I mean, of course, all of the confirmation bias is so, but are you seeing, like, with Braver Angels, are you seeing that those kind of things and getting that proximity power is making any difference, or we just have to see how this goes for the election cycle?
So that's a great question. Your question is what you're doing working? Braver Angels, flip side, is it making people less partisan? And that's a good question. Now, I like to think it is working because otherwise I'm wasting my life. But I think it does. I mean, we get testimonials from people every couple days saying something like, I can talk to my children again that we disagree with. We had nothing in common. Now I can talk to them. Or I can talk to my wife again, or something like that. And that says to me that at least for some people, this is working. And Braver Angels, I've been to a few of their events, and they're very effective. Now, I'm sure there's some self-selection. So the person who shows up at a Braver Angels event wants to hear the other side, and not everyone does. But the people who do want to hear are getting it. And I think that's at least a start, in that if you want to hear the other side, here's an option, read the flip side, go to Braver Angels. That didn't exist before. So small victories.
Last question.
Go ahead.
I'm just curious what your view is on the rise. You guys do such a great job of finding that. What does it look like now in the
Okay, so the question is, what about the rise of the independent party and maybe third parties?
third party?
Maybe third parties. Okay, I think that's a great question. And it's interesting because we had a slide, 28% of people don't like both parties. Now that would make you think, oh, maybe there's room for a third party to get those 28%. That's a pretty good start. But it's complicated. And I think the issue is that it's true that a lot of people don't like the two main parties, but the problem is they don't agree on what the third party should look like. There was a piece by Nate Silver a few years ago about this, about if third parties have a chance. And basically, his point was that everyone wants a third party, but they want their third party. And there's a lot of disagreement over what that would look like. And at the end of the day, the thing is the two parties, they're not perfect. They have a lot of problems, but they're pretty good at getting enough people under their wing. And when you see third parties succeed, one party copies them or steals them basically. So Donald Trump was basically a third-party candidate in 2016, if you think about it. I mean, a lot of his positions were not Republican positions. He had a history as a Democrat, but he showed up and said, hey, I'm this new guy. And he won the primary, and that was basically the Republican Party saying, we're going to take this third party and merge. So there's not much room for a third party because when they succeed, they get copied. And Bernie Sanders, in a way, was similar. He was very different from the modern Democratic Party. He showed up, he was successful, and the Democrats said, okay, join us. So I think third parties are important, not so much in that they're going to succeed. In our system, it's very hard for third parties to succeed. You need a majority. But because if they are somewhat successful, one or both of the parties will copy what they're doing. You saw this with Ross Perot a little in the 90s. Ross Perot was very successful as a third-party candidate. His big issue was the deficit. For a couple decades, both parties cared a lot about the deficit. Because of that, they don't care anymore. But that was very successful. If you care about Perot's policies and the deficit, he succeeded. If you care about him winning, sorry. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, so thank you again for an excellent presentation. You know, the mark of a good speaker is the number of curious questions that happen after a speaker. So we're very grateful that you shared your time and expertise with us, because another mark of a good speaker is being able to answer questions in a really good way. So excellent. So I have a gift for you. Yes, so as a speaker to our club, you are now the owner of our reusable tote bag with our logo on it. So feel free to parade this around town. Thank you very much for your time today. Okay, so our speaker bags come from an organization, well, it's not, that's a business. I'm so used to saying organizations up here. Sad Boy Tees, they are friends of mine with a screen printing business, so anything that you might need screen printed, they are the place to go. So I know that we have a couple of visiting Rotarians with us today, international. So I'm going to invite our international Rotarians up just to say your name and where you are from. So come on up, you'll just make a line because you have to speak into the microphone. So please come on up and just your name and where you are visiting us from. In the microphone.
Hello, I'm Peter Heil, coming from Germany in the south. Some know where it is. It's called Heidenheim. If somebody is interested in soccer, I'm not interested, but our small town, 50,000 people, have a club in the highest Liga, in the Bundesliga. So there is Heidenheim, between Munich and Stuttgart. And I'm here for a wedding in Grand Rapids. And now I'm on the riding motorcycle from Grand Rapids over the lake to Michigan, to Milwaukee, and all around with my cousin. So that's... Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for joining.
Good afternoon. I thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I had a curiosity to come in this club, the first club of Rotary, and I am from Brazil, our city Recife, and we have my club called Rotary Club Recife Boa Vista, the neighborhood. Yes, our club is from 1957. And I am very happy to be here today, and thank you very much.
Great, welcome. We always welcome our guests, our visiting Rotarians as well. So next Tuesday, the topic of our presentation will be called Finding Your Third Place from Richard Kite. So he will be here presenting for us. And again, that meeting is here. We only meet at Avali on the Tuesday night ones and then the fellowship meetings. Otherwise, we're here, and that doesn't start till November anyway. So make sure that you do register. We really prefer you to register by Friday because we have to turn our numbers in to the Union League Club. The first Monday of every month, we have the Rotary Means Business Fellowship that is at Cafe Chow. You don't have to be a member to attend those. These are networking events and fellowship as well. So that'll be coming up in a week and a half or so, the first Monday of each month. You don't have to register, you just go. That is at Cafe Chow. I believe that is on Madison. Every Friday, we have a round table. This is also just a fellowship. We actually have our two spearheads of the Friday round table here today with Ted and Richard. I don't know if you have, or if you are officially, but I have anointed you as the ambassadors of the Friday roundtables, Ted and Richard. So we appreciate you running those, really. Those are very informal. You don't register for those either. What's up, Ted? A visitor from Osaka, Japan this past Friday? Okay, great. Yeah, we get them from all over. It's really exciting. So speaking of exciting, the Rotary Convention, the International Convention, will be in Calgary next year. So if you are interested in attending, make sure you check that out. Prices will go up sometime in December. So you definitely want to look into that if you are interested in attending. Happy birthday to our October birthdays, our members, Harriet, Marvin, Kia, Franklin, and David. So happy birthday to you in October. Every week, you know, I get to stand up here and ask you for money, so this is the time to do that. All of our projects, all of those projects that I announced at the beginning, our international service projects, they're all run by our money, frankly. And so donating to the Rotary Foundation helps us run those really important projects. So yeah, we like to hang out, we're fellowship, but we're also service. And so that service means we need money. So please call the office and let them know how you would like to make your donation to our Rotary Foundation. One other announcement is from Alita. If you have an idea of a nominee for someone for the next president, or someone to be on the board, or if you yourself would like to be on the nominating committee, you need to reach out to Alita. And if you don't have her contact information, just ask me, or you can call the office as well to get her contact information. So Nancy is our next president, and then Shada, and then it's around this time that we start looking and interviewing for the next one. Okay, so if you have a nomination, please forward that to Alita. So with that, I think we're done. Let's rise for the four-way test, please. So this is the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. Number one, is it the truth? Number two, is it fair to all concerned? Number three, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Number four, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And then our number five, will it be fun? With that, I want to thank you in the room and you on Zoom for attending our meeting today. Make sure you do follow us on social media. And with that, I bring this meeting to a close. Thank you.